While we're waiting for to get started, just a few general reminders. If you don't have your oven preheated, go ahead and do that now. If you don't have your water on top of the stove warming or next to boiling, at least 2 cups of water, go ahead and get that started now while we wait these next few minutes. So welcome to my kitchen. I'm grateful to share this with you. I'm glad to see folks being able to still participate in some education, even if it's virtually. Boy, life has changed for us significantly, but I love that we still get to connect, at least at minimum, this way. So thanks for participating and being here. My name again is Joy Benjamin. I'm a dietitian, a couple of other things that I do, but my primary job is to be a dietitian. I work at AultCare in the wellness department, and a majority of what I do is education. So what I've put together tonight for you is a class that allows you to do a little bit of prep work in advance. So if you are a person who doesn't want to cook every single night, who doesn't want to spend that hour, half hour, whatever it might be for you, depending on your recipe, you can do that work as long as you're organized. And I put everything together for you, recipes, shopping lists, to-do lists, if you will. And what that does is just kind of frees up some space and some time for those of us that either A, don't want to do the cooking every night, or B, don't have the time each night to get that accomplished. So we are prepping 4 meals tonight. One of them you'll definitely be able to use as a leftover. If you're not participating in all the meals, that's okay. You can just kind of follow along and see what we do. And when your meal comes up, you get ready with your utensils to start prepping with us. I'm going to start us off by, I already mentioned in the beginning, making sure that your oven was preheated to 400, and to make sure that you also have a pot of boiling water on the stove if it's not boiling, near boiling. That's going to cook our quinoa. One thing we meant to mention, if you don't mind raising a hand, either in the chat box or visually, let us know if we have anyone out there that is trying to follow the vegetarian menu. We do want to make sure that if we have that I mention that as we go through. So if any of you are following the vegetarian menu, if you don't mind putting a hand up in the chat box to let us know in advance. Otherwise, I'm going to just peruse past that portion. So, and furthermore, here's what we're going to do. Because your oven is preheated, I want you to first start with your sweet potatoes, and we're going to get those popped in the oven so they can do a pre-bake. Sweet potatoes take sometimes over an hour to bake. So we're going to do some of that prep work tonight. And then when you decide to have that sweet potato for dinner, whatever night this week you choose to do that, you can pop it back into the oven and cut down your cooking time to maybe between 5 and 15 minutes, depending on how big your sweet potatoes are. So let's start by just covering those in foil. And this monster might take a good hour. I should mention to you that I am cooking for a family of 4. Many of you may not be cooking for a family of 4, but a family of 2. So some of my portions will be double what your portions will be, but I'll make sure that I mention that to you as we go through. So you're going to see me put in 3 big sweet potatoes. We're going to split that between my family. Once you get your sweet potatoes wrapped and ready, just pop them into the bottom shelf of your oven and we're all set. Okay, step number 1 is complete. Our next step is we're going to add the quinoa to our boiling water. If yours isn't quite boiling yet, that's okay. Add your quinoa anyway. It will start to heat and boil as it goes. We're going to set a timer for that.
Joy, so we have a question. There's no need to prick the sweet potatoes?
No need at all. In fact, what ends up happening If you prick your sweet potato, what you allow to take place is those juices will start draining and make a mess in your oven. So I never prick sweet potatoes. I only prick baked potatoes so that the air gets into the baked potato. They don't leak. They don't have juices like a sweet potato does. Our next step is to start with the asparagus. Thankfully, it made it in the nick of time. I'm going to tell you a secret. When I do these cooking presentations, I have to have these groceries delivered. It cuts down on a lot of different areas of my job. Unfortunately, the asparagus did not come today. So my husband was to the rescue and just got home literally in the nick of time with the asparagus. We're going to go ahead and take this and give it a good rinse, wash it off real well. Okay, onto the cutting board with your asparagus. A trick my grandmother taught me. When cutting asparagus to get rid of that woody texture, sometimes I'll just give it a bend and see where it snaps. But she taught me to take a sharp knife, and as soon as your knife goes in, easily, that's where you chop it off at. I'm just going to take and gently chop through this asparagus till I get the bottoms chopped off of here. And you go ahead and do the same at home. Whoop. Sometimes it feels like you're losing an awful lot of asparagus, but remember, you want this to be a palatable, desirable experience when you're eating your dinner. You don't want to try to save that which is not going to have a good quality chew factor. A big component of why we eat is for pleasure. And so we have to keep that in mind when we're cooking anything, whether it's a vegetable, a meat, a pasta, it doesn't matter the type of food. Asparagus is loaded with fiber. This is a very high fiber food in terms of a vegetable fiber. You have to keep in mind when we say high fiber, when you see that kind of jargon, we don't mean 10, 15 grams of fiber. That's entirely too much fiber. And typically foods that contain that much fiber usually are not a fruit or a vegetable. It's usually a processed food where fiber has been added. Our fruits and veggies only offer us sometimes 1 to maybe 4 or 5 grams at best of fiber. That's reasonable. We don't need significant amounts of fiber in our food for it to be a quality fibrous food. So if you're a person who enjoys cereal or breads that have extra fiber added, I would encourage you to maybe not participate in that habit, but to get your fiber from fresh fruits and veggies. When you cook your asparagus, what we're going to simply do is just get it cut and prepped and ready. But when you're in your cooking process of this asparagus, depending on how you like it, the texture that you prefer, it doesn't take but maybe 5 minutes or less to saute. Lots of great flavors you can add to asparagus. Today, we are adding a citrus flavor, but asparagus is great with just onions and peppers freshly sauteed in there, little olive oil, maybe some herbs that you have, whether dried or fresh. But asparagus lemon is also another great thing to squeeze onto your asparagus. So it can be used in many different ways. Let's get a container. Pop our asparagus in there. So it's ready when we're ready to use it this week. If you have a nice container that has a good seal to it, closes out a lot of the oxygen, this asparagus is going to last you up to 7 days freshly cut, but you have to have a good quality container that locks out that air. We're just going to lightly drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil. Now it's ready to put on either a cookie sheet to bake it in the oven or a saute pan to just give it a quick fry for 5-10 minutes when you're ready to make your dinner. If you like it cooked longer, you feel free to cook it longer. So my asparagus is ready to go. I'm just popping that over here. Next step, we're going to chop and wash our broccoli. This broccoli is going to be our side dish to do with our salmon. So let's give this a good rinse. Okay. Just pull off any gnarly looking leaves or undesirable pieces that don't look like you want to consume them. I have to say, this is a pretty pitiful size broccoli. I hope at home you have a bigger bunch than I do. So we're going to chop off the bottom. Toss that to the side. I know some folks who will actually peel that and chop it up and eat it and use it with maybe a dip like a vegetable tray. It's not to be wasted necessarily. It can be used. And oftentimes I'll chop up some pieces of that end as well to just add into my broccoli, which I think I'm going to have to do because mine is so pitifully small. I'm going to steal a little extra from these stems. Okay. Just going to give this a rough chop. I don't want it real small and tiny, but I also don't want to have to shove large florets into my mouth when I'm eating. So broccoli is another excellent vegetable loaded with vitamin C. Folic acid is very high in broccoli. So folic acid is just imperative to your blood health. I don't know if you've recognized that before, but folic acid is an energy resource. So when you don't have enough folic acid in your system, you may experience a little bit of an energy slump. There's many different vitamins that contribute to that, and folic acid is one of them. So I'm going to just chop a little bit of this stem up. And broccoli is another vegetable that is wonderful roasted, sauteed, raw, just like it is, thrown into a salad. And when you saute or bake your broccoli, you can also add a lot of different flavors. Really the same things that I mentioned for the asparagus can be added to the broccoli. So let's go ahead and take a container to throw our broccoli into. Give that a rough chop. I forgot about this guy. Pop him in our container. Clean myself off here a bit. And I'm going to give this just a slight drizzle of oil. I'm going to also go visit my quinoa. I just hear it bubbling back behind me, so I'm going to give it a stir. Our door's open. Okay. Next, let's go ahead and move into chopping some of our fresh herbs. If you have any parsley or cilantro for the recipes, we're going to go ahead and just pull out a bunch of that, give it a good wash. And if you'd like to get out a dish, a little saucer, or just set it on your countertop, you choose. But we're going to give this a nice light chop. This is our parsley. Chop off those ends there. Okay, go ahead and take this and pop it into a dish because we're going to use that here in just a few minutes. Next, go ahead and grab some of your cilantro. Give it a good rinse. And let's give that a fine rough chop. I didn't stir that quinoa, did I? We have about 5 minutes left on the timer for the quinoa. If you happened to set your timer, you should be around the same time frame that I am. But if you added yours later, feel free to cook that just a few minutes longer. It's going into a casserole recipe that we are going to bake. So don't feel like you have to cook that quinoa till it's mushy. You want it to have a little bit of texture to it when it's completed because it's going to bake an additional 30 minutes in the oven. So now we're going to chop up some of our parsley. Fresh herbs are, in my opinion, and actually a lot of professionals' opinions, these are some of the best spices that you can add to your food because they're so fragrant and so powerful. They're very pungent. oftentimes in recipes, we don't need a lot of salt added because we're using fresh herbs, and that takes on the flavor that our mouth is actually looking for. When your brain, you actually eat with your brain. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but many times we think we want to have something in here. And this is driven by what this thinks. So fresh herbs definitely stimulate the brain activity when we put them in our food because of the pungent flavor. Okay, also in the parsley, I'm going to turn my quinoa off and let it sit back to just rest these last 4 minutes. As it rests, it's going to soak up the rest of the water in that pan, and we'll be in a good place. Okay, now that we've completed our herbs, let's move on and start chopping. Actually, we're going to get ready our quinoa casserole ready. Some of my ingredients here were set forth just in case we needed to use this for the vegetarian menu, and some of these items we don't need. What I am going to get ready is my garlic, and here's why I'm getting the garlic ready right now. Grab a few cloves of garlic because we're going to need several of these for our recipe. When you are cooking with fresh garlic, and I would encourage you to always cook with fresh garlic, if you happen to have fresh, the jar of garlic that sits in oil, I want you to keep in mind that that garlic has been sitting in that oil sometimes for over 6 months before you purchased it at the store. I share that with you because I want you to understand that that's not considered fresh garlic anymore. It's no longer fresh. This was grown, put into the grocery store, and we purchased it. It's fresh because these bulbs are firm and plump, and yet have a very fragrant garlic scent to them. What's important about fresh garlic is that when you break open the garlic is when it becomes nourishing. As crazy as that sounds, if I don't expose this garlic to air, the allicin that is inside this garlic cannot be exposed to the air and then cannot, what we call develop. And if the allicin can't develop by being exposed to the air, then we lose that antioxidant. So you have to at least, if nothing else, crack it open and leave it sit on the counter for up to 10 minutes to allow that allicin to develop. That's why we're getting our garlic ready. So if you notice what I'm doing, I'm just taking a whole clove, it's got the skin on it, putting my knife on the side of it and pressing down with my palm, and it actually crushes it, and then that skin peels right off. But garlic is very, very nourishing, something we should be trying to get in our daily diet. It definitely has cholesterol lowering properties. So even if you don't have a problem with cholesterol, you still want to include garlic in your diet to prevent. That's certainly not the only property that garlic has. Other thing garlic is what we call a phytonutrient. Garlic has phytonutrients that help protect our bodies from cancer, oxidation of cells. Oxidation means that the cell has been exposed and those cells are now forming cancer-causing agents. Well, the allicin in your garlic is the phytonutrient that actually provides what we consider like a coating around your cells to protect your cells from those cancer-causing agents, from that oxidation. So hence one of the major reasons that we eat all fruits and vegetables, because each fruit and vegetable, lost that one, is made with a certain color, as you can well see on my countertop and probably on yours too. That color determines the phytonutrient in that type, in that fruit or vegetable. And each phytonutrient has a host of different functions in our human body. Those are truly the reasons that we should be eating fruits and vegetables. That's why they were put on the earth, and we were put on the earth to consume them, for the phytonutrients that do in a wide range of functions in our system that we take for granted every single day. Okay, let's move on. Our garlic is sitting here working. We're going to put together our quinoa casserole. So if you want to grab that recipe for yourself. We're going to start by getting our container. I'm going to just actually take and scooch this off to the side for a minute. I'm going to grab a big container. I have growing boys, so you're going to see my portions a little bit bigger than your portions. I have mouths that really don't stop eating very often. So first we have a can of black beans. Your recipe is going to call for half of a can. I'm going to add the whole thing. Let's double check. Do we drain our can? Drained and rinsed, yes. So in my sink over here, I have a colander ready to just pop these beans right into. So beans are going in. Next are my chickpeas or garbanzo beans. Little different. Normally we see in casseroles similar to this flavor, we see kidney beans going in. So you really can put any bean in that you want to put into this recipe. All about what your family will eat, what you enjoy. You want to get rid of some of the salt, give this a good rinse. Okay, this is going right in. Our next step is to add our hot quinoa to this. So take your quinoa right off the stove, pop that right into your casserole dish. Now, if you prefer to put a meat into this dish, you are most welcome to do that. This is what is considered a meatless meal. Certainly is recommended that we try 1 to 2 meatless meals per week for health purposes. However, if that's not something that interests you, that's okay too. You can easily pop in here some ground turkey, some chicken that's chopped up real well, or ground beef, very lean ground beef. If you choose ground beef, that would go in here just as well. So next we're going to add our chopped cilantro. I thought for a minute, which one is it? About 2 tablespoons. I'm going to add all of it because I love it. Next, you're going to add corn, and then we're going to add our chilies. Chilies will add a little bit of spice to this recipe, not very much. If you're a person who doesn't enjoy spice, you might taste this to make sure the green chilies aren't going to be too strong, but typically it really adds more flavor than it does add spice. If you like spice and this isn't enough, go with some cayenne pepper or dice up a jalapeno pepper fresh and add it right into your recipe. Next, let's go ahead with our cumin, chili powder, and that will be it for our seasoning. So with our chili powder, we're adding half a teaspoon of chili powder, half a teaspoon of cumin. I'm going to be honest, we like flavor around here. We like spice. One thing my 17-year-old son has said to me several times is I don't put enough seasoning sometimes. He's encouraging more. So I'm going to add more. You do what works for you. Mix up your casserole, taste it, see what you think. Recipes are a guide, remember. Somebody created this recipe. Doesn't mean it's going to appeal to your taste buds. So I always tell folks, use it as a starting point. Make adjustments as you need to, whether that's seasoning, whether that's the ingredients that go into it. Next is my cumin. Okay. I'm going to add a dash of pepper into this. Again, a little more, we'll just say spice to it.
So someone else has another question. So the meat we might add needs to be pre-cooked, right?
It should be, yes, just because of these other items are pre-cooked, and we're not going to cook the casserole for long enough to get that meat cooked well. Okay. Another ingredient. This is where a lot of flavor is going to come in. This is your enchilada sauce. This is what's going to give your casserole a moisture. So go ahead and open your enchilada sauce. Oh, I'm having trouble getting mine open. There we go. Okay, so your directions are going to tell you to add how much of your enchilada sauce? A 10-ounce can. I have a 12-ounce bottle. I'm popping it all in. Again, personal preference. Depends on the size and how much you've got going on in your casserole. Certainly, this is going to feed you for more than one meal. This happens to be your leftover meal that we're making tonight. So you can eat this one day and a couple days later, eat it again, or the next day, or save it for lunch, whatever you choose to do. The great thing about these recipes, and actually any recipe that you prep in advance, so long as you are storing them correctly, you can keep foods in your refrigerator either raw or pre-cooked, depending. Let's talk about how that process works. If it's raw, chicken, beef, pork, you can keep that in your refrigerator up to 3 days. By that third day, it needs to be cooked or pitched. If you are putting this into your refrigerator pre-cooked, and you just want to use it as leftovers to warm, you have 5 days on that pre-cooked food. Most people would say, oh, 5 days, but you can safely store meat, poultry, and chicken items already cooked in your refrigerator, so long as they're safely stored, meaning airtight. They're in a closed, sealed container. Now, if they're in a bowl like this and I just put some saran wrap around it, not quite sealed. I need a container similar to the idea where you're locking the lid in. You're locking it to secure it, or it's a Ziploc bag where we're locking the air out, pressing the air out. That is safe to leave stored in the fridge up to 5 days cooked. Okay, our casserole is essentially ready. You probably noticed I'm missing my corn. It's because it's in my freezer downstairs. We actually put corn up every year, and so I don't buy corn. I get it from my freezer. Well, I failed to lay it out there. So you go ahead and add your corn, whether it's a frozen bag of corn or whether it's a can of corn. Pop that into your casserole, drain it first if it's canned, and give it a good stir. To lower the sodium in this recipe, you'll want to use as many fresh products as possible. This is a challenging recipe to have it to be low sodium because of the canned nature of the foods that are going in here. But if you rinse your beans and you choose a frozen corn, you've definitely cut back on the salt content of this casserole. So I'm going to go ahead and give my spoon a rinse, take my casserole off of here, and go to the next step. Okay, our next step, let's move on past our casserole now and move into the salmon. So find your salmon recipe, pull that to the forefront. The good thing is that we've already done the veggies, so that's all set and ready to go. Our next step is to get that salmon out of the refrigerator and get going. If your salmon is a little bit frozen still, that's okay. Fish is one of those types of foods that you can still work with if you are working in advance with that food, and you can marinate it, put it back into its container, and allow it to defrost. So I have wild salmon. Let's talk about salmon. Why do you want to choose wild fish in general or shellfish instead of farm raised? Several reasons. Number one, farm raised fish or shellfish is high in omega-6 fatty acid. It's the same omega-6 is the same fat that you'll find in things like Cheetos and Doritos and Oreo cookies. Not the kind of fat that we're looking for. Omega-3 fatty acids, those are the fats that nourish us, that help prevent heart disease and stroke, and do a multitude of other things in our body. Those fats are found in wild-caught fish. Omega-6, the fats that we don't want, are added to the animal feed in farm-raised fish. So it's a little more expensive often to buy wild, but it's worthwhile. I'm going to ask you to get a container to put your fish into, and then once we put the fish in the container, we will start adding our seasoning to it. Okay. Mine happens to be individual cryovac containers. You may have a big fillet and you want to cut it on your cutting board. Your choice how you go about this, but I'm simply going to get my fillets and put them right into this container. Salmon is one of the really the only fatty fish that is available in our area. When you're talking about good quality fats in the diet, and often you'll hear salmon or fatty fish is a good fat. It's challenging to find mackerel and sardines, and many folks don't care for sardines. That's really about all that we have access to in the state of Ohio, because we don't live obviously by the ocean. So this tends to be the go-to fish for a good quality fatty fish. If you don't enjoy fish and you're wondering if you should be taking a fish oil supplement, speak to your doctor about it. It's an okay idea, especially if you're consuming no fish at all, but you can get omega-3 fatty acids in other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to come from fish. It's just a very nourishing way to get it. Because keep in mind, supplements, dietary supplements, don't contain all of the components that a food would. So while, let's say this pepper is loaded with vitamin C, but I can take a vitamin C tablet every day and still have more maybe than this pepper, or the same amount. What I'm missing though is every other nutrient this pepper provides. That's the reason that we suggest food first, supplements second. Another thing to keep in mind when you're just thinking about your menu, what you're preparing, what you're planning on eating, is it's important to make sure that you're using both cooked and raw vegetables. The reason for that is because our bodies have different nutrient needs on a regular basis. Depends on what we're going through that particular time or day. You will absorb nutrients differently depending on whether the food is cooked or whether it is raw. And for me to sit here and tell you which one is the most available, I would have to study just fruits and vegetables. So that's why we say to you, get a wide range so that you meet all of your body's needs. So our salmon is ready for some seasoning. One of the things we're going to do is add our garlic. If you don't have a garlic press, that's okay. Chop it up on your cutting board and pop it in. It might be a little bit thick or rigid. That's okay. When you cook it, you're going to cook out a lot of the garlic flavor. I have a garlic press. As you can see, it's a very well used garlic press. I think I've had it over 20 years. I just simply pop in a half of it and give it a squeeze. And it's a beautiful thing. It just shoves it right through those little holes. Your recipe calls for 4 cloves of garlic, I believe, for 4 salmon. So if you're not making 4 salmon, it's just 2 maybe, then you can stop at your 2 cloves of garlic. But if you like a lot of garlic flavor, go for it. Add whatever you prefer. I am almost there. You might be wondering why I make so much food. We use leftovers in our house for lunch. That's just the way that we function. We don't make a lot of sandwiches necessarily, at least not for my husband. We just use leftovers to pack in lunches and or to make for lunches at home whenever we can. Another great thing, the reason for leftovers is it stops me from having to cook every single night. I don't mind cooking, but life gets a little busy and I'm sure that you've experienced the same. So it's nice to sometimes just have one thing checked off your list. Dinner's done, all we have to do is warm it up. Okay, next, let's go with our fresh rosemary or our dried rosemary in this case, thyme, salt, and pepper. So I'm going to start with my pepper. And I've got layers of salmon here. You may just have one or two. So when I add mine, I'm going to add a good bit, and then I'm going to shake this bowl around so it covers everything.
So there's another question. She peeled my garlic, not using all of it. How do I store it?
You can just wrap it in saran wrap or put it into a Ziploc bag in the refrigerator.
And how long is that usually good for then? Your peeled garlic in the refrigerator?
You know, that can last sometimes up to a few weeks. It's one of those things where you have to pull it out of the refrigerator. And if you notice that it's starting to get maybe a wilt to it, either use it or get rid of it. But you should have a good solid week on fresh garlic that you've peeled, if not more. Good question. Okay, let's go with some fresh thyme. I'm going to just do a sprinkle. You feel free to measure that or pinch it and sprinkle it onto your fillets. This is really just giving it a nice flavorful herb blend. And my rosemary, that was the next ingredient that went on. I'm going to take and put a lid on this. Maybe you have a Ziploc bag and you can just kind of squish all of the goodness together. You know what? Does this say? This one doesn't tell me to add oil, but I'm going to go ahead and put a drizzle on, because when we put these onto a cookie sheet, it certainly is going to help from sticking on the cookie sheet. Now I'm just going to give it a good shake around. So all my flavors get moving in there. Everybody gets a touch of the goodness, and then I'm going to set this off to the side. We are moving along. I can smell my sweet potato cooking. I hope you can too. That's a good sign. Okay, at this point, our salmon and herb salmon and broccoli recipe, excuse me, is complete. We can set that off to the side behind our enchilada casserole.
Joy, there's another question. Do you use parchment paper for baking?
I do. When I have it, that's the truth. If I don't remember to have it, then I will use actually foil. I'll put foil down and go ahead and put a light coating of olive oil on my foil, and then I'll bake that way. So either one works just fine. Okay. Now we are moving on to our citrus chicken. So I'm going to go grab my chicken right from the fridge. You do the same. Going to steal a container to put my chicken into to marinate. You know what? I think I'm going to use my Ziploc bag for this one. Okay. So what we're adding to our chicken today is a citrus blend. This is just a nice way to make chicken. This is a nice summer dish. This is a nice winter dish because citrus is available right now. This is the season for citrus. So if you're wondering what fruits to be participating in, it's definitely oranges, grapefruits, lemons, limes, cooking with them, eating them themselves. Nobody loves sucking on lemons and limes, but certainly your oranges and grapefruits. This is the time to capitalize on this. And certainly one of the main reasons that it's good for us and that we should be eating in season is the vitamin C content is extraordinary in helping to prevent and protect us from viruses. And obviously, this is the season for that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and cut into our chicken. Your recipe calls for tenderloins, the store delivered chicken breasts to me. So I'm just going to take a minute and chop these before I pop them into the Ziploc bag. You can keep them whole if you want to. Oftentimes on tenderloins, very little fat at all comes on your chicken. Used to be that I was taught, wash my chicken before I cook it, right? Not any longer. The reason for that is one of the reasons that we were teaching to wash your chicken was to supposedly get rid of the salmonella. But what we find is that all it's doing is it's spreading it around your sink. You're not getting rid of it. You're just rinsing the chicken. Salmonella has to be cooked away. It cannot be washed away. So really and truly, our best way to protect ourselves from salmonella is just cooking your chicken thoroughly, not to death, not till it's dry, but just until it's done. If you cook with a thermometer, that's 160 degrees. And if you're never sure, you should be able to cut your chicken open. It should be completely white on the inside and still juicy. So I'm just going to give these a rough chop in half, simply because I don't have tenderloins. You can put yours right into your Ziploc bag or your container. And then the next step is we're going to cut our citrus open and give it a good squeeze into our bag. Okay. At this point, I've used my cutting board for chicken. I'm getting rid of it. It's going into the sink, as did my knife. And I'm giving my hands a good wash before I go back to working with any other food. One of the ways to prevent cross-contamination in your kitchen. Okay, we're ready to work with our citrus. Take a lemon, take an orange, roll it on your counter first. Releases the juices from inside the skin. Allows you to get more juice out of your citrus. I have a handy juicer. Again, another device, it's well used. You'll see it doesn't look fabulous, but it's got a lot of love to it. I'm going to cut off the ends of my lemon first so that it fits nicer into my juicer. If you don't have a juicer, just take your hand once we cut this open and give it a good solid quality squeeze. We're going with half the lemon. Remember, I'm doubling my recipe. I'm using the whole thing. Save the rest of your lemon and your orange. Add it to your tea, add it to your water. Throw it into a pitcher of water in the fridge to sit and marinate. Provides great flavor. And lemon is something we should really be trying to get in most days of the week. It's a natural antiseptic. So it's going to help us to prevent a lot of viruses and or bacteria from entering our system. It's not going to cure us, but it's definitely going to help inhibit those guys from settling in your body. So add your orange. Lots of great vitamin C in this recipe. Excellent winter recipe. Give it a good squeeze, get all those juices in there. I'm going to add another one. Oh. Trying not to wear this. I'm going with the rest. We're going to next add, and you go feel free to take that next step, add a little bit of oil to your marinade here. We don't need tons of oil. Our flavor's coming from obviously our citrus and our herbs. The oil does, its purpose really is for when we place this in to be sauteed or baked, whatever you choose to do. The recipe gives you some options. You can either grill this. Most of us aren't going outside to grill these days. Or you can take it and bake it on a cookie sheet with either parchment paper or foil. I always say I use that so that my pan is clean when I'm done. And I usually get upset if it's not and I have to wash it. Okay, from here, let's go ahead and add our garlic powder and our onion powder. Because we have so much fresh garlic in front of us, for those of you who maybe peeled extra garlic, now would be a great time to use it. So take that garlic. If you didn't peel it, you're welcome to. If you prefer to use powdered garlic, you go right ahead. But since I have this fresh garlic in front of me, and this bulb looks pretty amazing. I'm going to add it to my chicken. Okay, mine's ready to be popped right in there.
So the recipe says to zest too.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yes, it does. We'll do that. Zesting, as you probably well know, just adds a little bit more of a citrus kick to your recipe. It's a personal choice if you do or don't want to do it, but we will because we want as much flavor in this recipe as possible. Okay. Grab one or two of these guys. My zester. Obviously, we would have done this first where it was a little bit more easier to hold in your hand. If you have a zester, go ahead and do that now. And I'll grab a little orange. A couple seeds popped out. Good bit of zest in there. Take that. Last, I believe, was onion powder. And we're adding a teaspoon of onion powder to our recipe. I'm adding 2 because I have a double recipe here. Okay. Close up our bag. Make sure I got everything. Pinch of pepper. Let's do that. All right, we are all set. Let's close this up tight. Squeeze it around. Excuse me. And our chicken is ready to go. At this point, our last step is our pork chops. And grab our sweet potatoes out of the oven to get them cooling down. And at that point, we are finished and we're ready to clean up. We've been doing very well in our process tonight. Let me check and see how these are doing. Mine are good sized sweet potatoes. So I have another at least 20 minutes with my sweet potatoes. You feel free to pull yours out when you get a good how shall I say, softness where you can easily push your thumb into it. They're ready to go. Let's go ahead and grab our pork chops and get those prepped. Pork chops can be a very simple, very easy, but very delicious meal to have. In this case, we're doing pan-fried pork chops. Excuse me. We're just going to add a simple seasoning to these pork chops. A little bit of garlic, a little bit of onion, pardon me. So much talking. A little bit of olive oil, and then your pork chops are ready with a very basic marinade. Again, because these are raw, it's important that you use these within the next 3 days. So we're going to go with this bowl here. Going to add my pork. You know something, I don't have super lean pork chops, so I'm going to take a minute and chop off some of this outer layer of fat. If you have the same problem, I would encourage you to do the same. There's plenty of marbling throughout pork chops that we don't need the additional outer layer of lard or saturated fat. Many would say to you, but that's good flavor. It's only good flavor if we want to compromise our health. We can get flavor out of the seasoning that we place on our pork chops. Depending on the type of pork that you chose, whether you have a nice, lean, round center cut pork chop, or what I happen to have here is called a pork steak. Again, that's what was available. Pork can be used in replace of, if you will, white chicken or turkey. So it can be considered the other white meat. Pork is typically a much leaner than meat, so you can feel a little bit more comfortable eating a pork chop versus maybe a nice heavy sirloin steak. I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay, let's start with our seasoning. We're doing a pinch of granulated garlic per side and a pinch of onion powder per side. So it's really more of a visual. This is certainly a great, again, summertime grilling food, or popping it into a frying pan, or even into an oven to bake them. If you've ever tried to make pork chops a little more tender, you simply just take them on, lay them on a cutting board and beat them really well. Plastic covering maybe would help from things splattering at you, but give them a good beating and they become very, very tender. Now we're just going to season a little bit of garlic powder on those. And again, you do the volume that you prefer. Okay, my pork chops are ready to sit in the refrigerator. Again, they call for a little bit of olive oil. We're just going to kind of give it a little drizzle. And as we pull those out to put them in their frying component when we're ready, they'll be all marinated and ready to go. Okay, let me give my hands a good wash. At this point, what we have left is our cheese for the casserole. We didn't necessarily add that cheese in just yet. You can either, I would prefer that you add that into your casserole right before you're ready to put it into your casserole dish. Mix it in, lay out your, spread it into your casserole dish, and then top it with the remaining cheese. I prefer and encourage that you actually purchase blocks of cheese and shred it yourself rather than containers of pre-shredded cheese. The reason for that is in pre-shredded cheese, there's a component that's added very similar to sawdust, and it is sort of a sandy texture meant to keep those shreds of cheese from clumping. So if you use it fresh and just shred it yourself, you avoid that cake. It's called an anti-caking agent. You avoid having to worry about putting that into your diet. So when you're ready to put your cheeses in, you're just simply going to grate a half a cup into your casserole dish. The recipe calls for cheddar and mozzarella. We like spicy around here, so I chose a pepper jack and a mozzarella. And then you're going to add your Parmesan cheese at that same point. Also, your Parmesan cheese is going to be used to sprinkle on top of your asparagus, as well as your broccoli if you choose to. So you won't use your whole container of Parmesan cheese in your casserole dish. You'll use a majority of it in your sprinkle for your asparagus and broccoli. At this point, I'm going to go check in my oven, see how my sweet potatoes are doing. I can hear them sizzling. They certainly need a little bit longer to cook. Your choice if you want to continue to cook those tonight, or if you want to pause that cooking, open them up to cool, and then pop them into the fridge when they have cooled. When you're ready to cook the dish that the pork chops actually that go with your sweet potato, you feel free to continue to do that pre-cook as you're baking the pork chops and getting your green beans ready. This actually concludes our preparation. You see, it took us about 1 hour to do preparation for 4 meals for our evening. Now this week, when you get ready to cook those meals, some of them take like no step at all. A casserole, putting it into a dish, shredding some cheese and into the oven. Our pork chops are going right into a frying pan or onto a cookie sheet and ready to be baked. We've done all of the steps that are mainly time consuming through the week in 1 hour of time. Now all you have left to do in your home is a little bit of cleanup. Thank you for joining me. If there are any questions, I'm going to hang here for a few more minutes just in case you have some questions coming in.